The Mountaineers look to rebound, and that is an understatement as they move towards week 2 of the 2024 college football season. West Virginia coming off of a disappointing 34-12 loss to Penn State in their home opener, one of the most anticipated West Virginia openers ever, certainly of this century, and the program billed it as the biggest one since 1998. And yet West Virginia didn't show up, and they lost to Penn State 34-12. But Neil Brown turning the page, the program turning the page. So we are going to turn the page here at WV Sports Now. This will be a preview show edition here of our podcast, Mountaineer Report. Ethan Bach not joining me on this particular episode, but I will have a guest to help discuss West Virginia's next opponent, because again, the Penn State game is over. As bad as that was, the game is over, and now this team really just needs to put some good film together, which is kind of what Neil Brown has been talking about now for several days. But it may not be as easy as many think, even though this is an FCS opponent. They have a really quality FCS opponent coming up in the Albany Great Danes, an 11-win team a season ago, a team that did have a run in the FCS playoffs. And to have this conversation about what Albany does bring to the table, and if a major upset, and it would be a major upset in college football history, can happen this Saturday under the lights, as you're going to get to see the new light effect now at the stadium. I will be joined by Adam Shinder of the Daily Gazette up there in upstate New York. Adam, thanks for jumping on with me, man. I know you do cover Albany, so I wanted to get somebody that's close to the program, that covers that program, and to kind of touch on what can happen in this game. So first off, how are you, and how bad did I butcher your last name?
Not too bad. My last name's been butchered ever since Schindler's List came out in 1993, so it's been a while.
Okay, so nonetheless, I'm glad to have you aboard here. And Albany is coming off of a quality season. So are the Mountaineers, but Albany riding high into this game and trying to spark the upset. Neil Brown's been kind of warning fans that this is a really good Albany team, even though obviously the Mountaineers are going to be expected to win this game. There's not even really a Vegas sportsbook spread out there. I couldn't really see a legit one. I'd imagine most are going to figure a multiple touchdown win for the Mountaineers, but if they play as bad as they did against Penn State, they could lose to anybody. So what's the vibe around campus for Albany? Do they believe they can do this? Are they having pep rallies? Is this kind of a homecoming affair that West Virginia was putting together prior to the Penn State game? Is this their biggest game of the season in their Super Bowl because they are playing an historic program in the West Virginia Mountaineers, or is it just another game?
I mean, it's big for them. They've played a number of big FBS games right. in the last few years. They actually played 2 last year in back-to-back weeks, which is a little bit rare. Their schedule just had that. They had an opener about 2 years ago when they went down to Baylor and just absolutely got it handed to them as they were very much getting a new group right. going, but. This is a program that kind of embraces the FBS games, but they generally go in with realistic expectations. They've been competitive. They've been very competitive against teams like Buffalo. They played a pretty close game with Pitt a few years back. But they go in. These are very much they are games that Greg Gattuso, the Albany head coach, kind of embraces as a necessary evil. You want to challenge yourselves. It obviously is a game that brings in a lot of income for the program.
Yeah, you're getting paid 100%. Albany's getting paid. Yeah,
but and then they have another huge non-conference game next week. They go all the way out to Idaho, which is a rematch of the FCS quarterfinal that Albany won last year. So those are 2 big games. But this is a team that, with as tough as the CAA is, and it's as deep as any league at the FCS level is, they use September as a chance to get ready.
Okay, and it makes sense. This is almost really an exhibition game when you're an FCS program. This is not going to ruin your year. You can have a special season, as you're touching on there, of the past games. And they also had a close one with Marshall. They gave Marshall everything they could handle about a year ago as well. And Albany is coming off a quality season. It's interesting, though, that they aren't acting like maybe this could be a game they could win. And granted, West Virginia is very likely going to win this. And if they don't, that is a catastrophe for the West Virginia program. But you mentioned the Idaho game. They had a tough game with Oregon, who many people think could win the national championship on the FBS level. Albany has that win over them. There are some weird connectivity here that if any FCS program could kind of try to nip a down major program that's coming off of a really bad effort, it maybe could be Albany. I'm sure also you probably watched that West Virginia Penn State game. I'm sure Albany watched it and is like, if we get that West Virginia team, we could maybe do it, figuring they won't play like that back-to-back weeks though.
Yeah, this is an Albany team that is let's be clear off the first bat. This is a very, very different team than the team that won 11 games last year.
Okay, that's a point then. Okay.
Not just 50% of us, the starters. This was pretty much a 50% roster turnover from last season. Last season was, by any measure, the best season that this program has ever had. They'd gotten to a pretty good point by 2019. They were a playoff team, won a playoff game. It got really hurt by the pandemic and had 3 straight pretty down years. Last year, everything came together, but it also came together in a way that a lot of the talent they had has either graduated or gone through the portal. They have a defensive line that had 50 sacks last year, and none of them are back. They had their quarterback. their quarterback Reese Poffenbarger from a year ago is now backing up Cam Ward down at Miami. Right. They brought in Miles Burkett, transfer out of Wisconsin, who made his first start in their season opening win over LIU last week. And that game was competitive, probably a little bit more competitive than Albany would have liked, but it was also a game played in pretty bad weather here, rain through most of the game. Not really the best chance for a quarterback and a brand new receiving core to get things going. They struggled a little bit to get LIU off the field. We're hitting time of possession a little bit, but made a couple plays on defense, a couple plays on special teams.
LIU is a program that's played West Virginia before. They do. I mean, it's a while ago. They did not this roster, but LIU has played West Virginia before. I did see that in some game film that I noticed that's been circulating of semi-common matchups between the two schools. But again, here's talking with Adam Shinder of the Daily Gazette as we are previewing West Virginia and U of Albany. Under the lights, it's going to be weird. West Virginia did play an FCS game, 6 p.m. kickoff last year against Duquesne, which is a regional matchup, a much closer proximity game. And they ended up actually recruiting and landing Aiden Garnes from that game. So win or lose, these Albany kids, the West Virginia coaches clearly look at those games and potentially try to pluck them in if they're ready to move up. So that could be something too, depending on their eligibility. But it will be a night game. It'll be an interesting atmosphere for Albany to be able to experience. I did also want to ask you, because looking at the past records of Albany, everyone focuses in on Neil Brown I did 11-win season, the playoff run last year, etc. But it's not always that way. And I did notice that prior to that 11-win season, there were some downtimes for Albany. They had a 9-win year a few years ago as well. So you mentioned the major roster turnover from last year to this year, which is interesting. I knew there was some, but that's catastrophically different that it's hard to even gauge off last year. But what did Albany do to take itself to an elite level at the FCS level where it wasn't before? Because it does seem like there was a major jump off of what normally is the case for Albany.
Yeah. So coming off of 2019, they basically in 2020 had a year where they were not on the football field at all. New York COVID restrictions hit pretty hard.
Well, that's the point. Yeah.
They don't play again until they have a very haphazard spring season in 2021. They barely win their first game. They lose their next 3, and then they have so many injuries that they end up calling it quits. This fall of 2021 is as bad an offensive season of football as this program's had in a long time. They make a change at offensive coordinator after that, and that's really when the turnaround starts. They were not good in 2022. They really struggled defensively, but the offense really made a turnaround. They brought in Jared Ambrose, really, really talented FCS level offensive coordinator in the CAA. was part of a team that made a run to the national championship game at Towson, had previously been at Delaware. And they just started hitting the transfer portal. And they've done a really, really good job in the portal the last couple of years, bringing in guys. What they've done really well is actually get in a lot of under recruited guys and guys from lower levels. They hit big on both JUCO and Division II transfers. Guys who played at D2 and then ended up, older guys who made huge contributions on this team last year. And then they've been lucky that they've hit on a few guys that were maybe under recruited, under the radar guys. Dylan Kelly, their linebacker last year, was as good. It was a finalist for the Buck Buchanan Award as the best defensive player in FCS. Was basically a walk-on safety out of the Buffalo area. Came here and by the end of last year had led all of FCS in tackles. Probably a better story for that in recent years, and he was not part of last year's team, was Jared Verse, who came in at about a completely under-recruited 200-pound kid out of central Pennsylvania. They were the only team that recruited him to play defensive end. He put on 50 pounds during the pandemic, had 12 sacks over a year and a half.
Probably not the only one. Kind of a common thing during the pandemic.
He put on 50 pounds of muscle. This was
a little different
when
than
you watch him coming out. He became and then actually gets recruited to Florida State off of one FBS game that they played out at Syracuse a couple of years ago, and all of a sudden he's the a top 20 pick in the NFL draft this season. But they hit on their portal moves, and last year really all came together. They had an explosive offense and a defense that got after the passer and stopped the run. So it was a really, really special combination. But the entire starting defense from last year is gone, and most of the whole passing game is gone. They do return a very good running back in the entire offensive line, which is where the strength of this team is right now.
Yeah, and 3-8. Overall, 2022, 2023, 2-6 in conference play, and then it does flip to that special year. That's the word. The 11-4 season, the 7-1 in conference play, the playoff run for Albany, and that is off of last year. But as you're discussing, this is a different roster. It'd be interesting what that game would have been then. West Virginia obviously won 9 games, including a bowl game at the FBS level. But going into the season, the thought was they were going to have another down year. They're coming off of 5-7 in 2022. So it would have kind of been interesting if this game was scheduled last year, maybe.
Albany was
the team.
Yeah, Albany, with the exception of their FCS semifinal loss to South Dakota State last year, who that South Dakota State team was as good as any Group of 5 FBS team in the country.
Some of those programs up there in the Dakotas
those Dakota teams are terrifying. Right. But Albany early in the season last year they were very competitive. Really, probably should have won that game against Marshall down on the road.
I was going to bring up the game against Marshall. That Neil Brown brought that up. That game against Marshall, obviously another West Virginia program, even though Marshall is a Group of 5 and West Virginia is a Big 12 major conference team, but. And as you may or may not know, a lot of politic issues in terms of West Virginia Marshall not playing anymore and that history there. But that's a semi-common threat, even though not a common opponent.
Yeah, and then the next week they go all the way across the country. They play Hawaii in a game where their head coach, Greg Gattuso,
1 point difference, right?
Yeah, didn't even make the trip because he got sick the day before they flew across the country and stayed home, and competitive in a game that started, 3 a.m. Eastern time.
Yeah. Or 31-20.
Yeah. And they were in it, and just kind of some turnovers in the second half ended up hurting them. But other than that, and this was a team that the other thing that really changed last year was for those 3 years where they won 6 total games, they probably lost 15 games by a touchdown or less and just were seemingly inventing new ways to lose. They had a game that they lost.
West Virginia fans are familiar with that.
They had a game where they lost by 3 points because twice they couldn't get a hold down on a field goal attempt. They had games they lost on penalties. They had games they lost on 2-point conversions to try and win rather than take the points and go to overtime. And last year, they won some close games. They also just decided, well, it's a lot easier if we just score 30 more points than the opponent, especially when they were playing at home. They were a really good team at home last year.
And I do see in October victory over Towson, which is also a program that West Virginia's played before in the past, 24-17 in that game. And then the Idaho win, which Neil Brown has brought up multiple times because that is a staple game. Idaho certainly plays West Virginia quality programs, if not higher up, and usually gives them problems. And Idaho, where Albany did beat them 30-22 in that big game, that playoff game. Again, here talking with Adam Shinder of the Daily Gazette, or Adam Shinder of the Daily Gazette, as we are previewing West Virginia and Albany this Saturday, 6 p.m. kickoff, ESPN Plus, under the lights. So that'll be something kind of new. They did change things around there. You mentioned this being such a different team, though, than last year's team. So what does this year's Albany team do well? What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? What do you expect them to try to do? I don't know how much you know about West Virginia, but what do you expect them to try to do in this matchup, trying to put a good effort forth here against the Mountaineers?
Yeah, I think anything with this Albany team right now has to start with establishing their running game. Griffin Waddell came from being a walk-on in spring 2023, was a redshirt freshman walk-on. Kind of broke out during spring practice in the spring game. By the end of September, he becomes a starting running back. He ended up as the CAA Rookie of the Year. A really versatile running back who can hit some big plays. Was kind of bottled up for most of the game against LIU last week, but he did finish with 85 yards on 20 carries. Had a short touchdown set up by a 41-yard run. So the key to this team right now lives on. They've got that running game back with him and an entire returning offensive line. They actually have 6 guys who started last year who are all back because one of their real veteran guys, Scott Hausman, missed most of the season, and they had to put Sean Duggery, a true freshman, in at center. They were playing 2 true freshmen on the offensive line through most of the season and through their entire playoff run. All those guys back this year. So for a team that's still kind of figuring out its passing game, I would expect them to try and run it, but Jared Ambrose is an offensive coordinator, does love to throw the ball and loves to take shots. This was a team that generated a ton of big downfield plays last year. Their top 2 receivers generated 24 touchdowns between them, 1,900 yards between them. They're gone, but Seven McGee, wide receiver, transferred from Jackson State, before that from Oregon, had a big game in his first game with Albany. So I would expect them to try and stretch the field a lot, but it's probably going to be a lot of trying to establish some early down stuff and then get downfield with some speed on the outside that they do have.
Okay. And the defensive line is a potential question mark for the Mountaineer defense. Certainly did not perform in the Penn State game. Probably the spot on the defense with the lowest number of star players. You could, Sean Martin being the leader of that group, Eddie V, a quality player in that group, but not really a jump out player that's a superstar. More depth maybe at secondary this year than the past, but last year had a consensus All-American that's not around in Beanie Bishop, who's with the Steelers. So maybe not as top flight of a player over there as well. And kind of a new role for Aubrey Burks is kind of a hybrid situation of a safety linebacker. So some differences there. So it'll be interesting what West Virginia does if Albany does really try to pound it and try to control the game on the ground before eventually going deep. Although the big plays going deep didn't work against Drew Aller and Penn State either for West Virginia. If this game gets out of hand, because this is not the 11-win Albany team, and West Virginia is coming off a 9-win season, they did look really bad against Penn State. It's one of the worst efforts they've had in a while. But this is still a West Virginia team that should certainly be better than what they put on tape against Penn State, that many believe could contend for a Big 12 title in a wide open conference, that should still have a quality year. Neil Brown's still trying to sell the fans on having hope. And maybe you chalked it up as Penn State's a national title contender, a top 10 team, and West Virginia had a really bad day at the office, a lot in front of this Mountaineer team too, but they obviously got to be better. So there's a chance West Virginia could win this game by 30-plus points. The chance, I'm sure, that they could struggle and really depress their fans. But if this game gets out of hand and the Mountaineers dominate and the Mountaineers play way better than Penn State and they show kind of who they really are and up to potential, what do you think that looks like? Like, how bad could this be for Albany if West Virginia plays to their potential, obviously assuming the talent differential is a way different scenario than even what they were dealing with last week in Albany against LIU, a 6-point win against LIU versus a Big 12 opponent in West Virginia.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it looked so prior to last year and being competitive against Marshall and Hawaii, the last two times they played, power conference teams were the opener against Baylor in 2022, and that was a 50-plus point loss. Where they were never really in it. The Baylor defense was just way too much for them. And then the year before that, they went out to Syracuse and allowed 60-plus points to a Syracuse team that ended up being not very good.
I know. So yeah, okay.
but they did have a couple of very good players on it.
True.
But the way this team has generally operated in these playing up FBS games, if they're able to stick around in the first half, if they don't let the team get too far away from them, they can generally be competitive. If it's 14-0 with 8 minutes left in the first quarter, that's when the snowball starts rolling downhill. It happened to Albany exactly the same in their playoff loss to South Dakota State last year. South Dakota State marches down the field, scores a touchdown. UAlbany's driving, interception kills the drive. It's 14-0 by the time you blinked, and they're never in the game.
Yeah, and I'd imagine that's the plan for the Mountaineers, not disrespecting Albany, because Neil Brown certainly respects them from what he's been saying. But this team has even more pressure than they would have if they had a close game with Penn State or somehow shock the world and beat Penn State to really put it on and impress in this game. So we will see what happens. If you recall, or for any Albany fan watching this, if you aren't aware, West Virginia did exactly what you're saying. That kind of happened last year in the FCS game against Duquesne, and weather was involved here. You mentioned rain. We got to hope that doesn't happen again. But West Virginia had a 14-10 advantage over Duquesne. Then weather got involved. Duquesne was celebrating. They thought they were very much in the game, and we were flat told in the press box, Duquesne is not conceding this if the weather never cooperates because they think they got a chance. Second half starts, weather calms down. West Virginia just dominated, and 50-plus points. They won by going away. So you did have an FCS team that was hanging with them closer than most do, and then it just opened up, and then they recruited Aiden Garnes out of the Dukes. It'll be interesting if Albany can do what Duquesne did in the first half, but then keep it up in the second half, or it becomes similar, or West Virginia just dominates the entire game. Adam, I do want to get you out of here with this, and I do appreciate you joining me here kind of last minute as we're previewing West Virginia and Albany here for Saturday's game. Week 2 for both teams. Albany 1-0, and the Mountaineers, obviously, 0-1 in desperate need of a win. What's a key in this game for you, for Albany? What's a player to mention for a West Virginia fan that's not aware of Albany? A player or two maybe to point out that you think if Albany is competitive in this game, these players are going to be players to watch, or anything else on Albany?
Yeah, I think the biggest key for UAlbany is controlling possession. So it means success on early downs and then easily convertible third downs. They don't want to be in 3rd and 8, 3rd and 12. Let West Virginia tee off on a pass rush. That's what happened in the Marshall game last year. Was that all of a sudden UAlbany couldn't run the ball. Marshall's pass rush just became too much. And really UAlbany couldn't generate any offense in the fourth quarter. But the two guys I'd say to really look out for on UAlbany, if they're able to keep Miles Burkett, the quarterback, upright, that's probably going to a lot be on their left tackle, Ozzie Hutchinson, who's a 6th-year player, returning starter. He's a preseason All-CAA, All-American consideration, Senior Bowl invitee. It's a guy whose name could be called in the NFL next spring, as he's going to have 40-plus starts by the time he's done. And then the other name I'd mention, because whenever a game like this happens, if an FCS team is going to pull something, special teams are probably going to be involved. And Jamal Cooney broke a 55-yard kick return to start things off for UAlbany last week. Was a really interesting player. Was one of the top receivers and returners in the Ivy League when he was at Dartmouth, took 2023 off, transferred to Albany, and really kind of on special teams came right in without missing a beat. Be interesting to see if he works his way in, get a few more targets. He was only targeted once last week, but he's a guy who is very, very much capable of breaking a big return. And those are the kind of momentum plays, both for flipping field position, anything like that. That's the kind of stuff they're going to need. But sustained possessions and then keeping the West Virginia offense off the field as much as possible is probably what Albany needs to do.
Yeah, and those are the things that happened when West Virginia either was down early against an FCS team or was close for a while. I mean, the Mountaineers, they don't have FCS losses on their resume, but Duquesne was able to do that with a big return. LIU a while ago, able to control kind of things on special teams for a hot minute. Yeah, those things probably have to happen, although I will say it's kind of funny you mentioned that because the only unit that played well against Penn State for West Virginia was special teams. The special teams unit, both sides, whether it's defending or trying to get returns, better than last year, better than a couple years ago. So that should be the unit that doesn't fully break down and just allow Albany to do whatever they want and run kicks back, and certainly not multiple. So we'll see, Adam. I definitely appreciate the time. I'm sure a lot of West Virginia fans, a lot of fans around the Big 12 will learn something now about Albany that they maybe did not know before. Are you going to be down in Morgantown covering the game?
Unfortunately, will not be. I also cover our local Division III team, Union, who has their opener this weekend as well. Okay. So kind of split duties. But I was down in Morgantown about 20 years ago when I was a Syracuse student for
interesting.
For a game where Pat White and Steve Slayton ran for about 400 yards between them.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I remember that one. Yeah, that's a different vibe and different trip for you there. So too bad I won't see you in the press box there at the stadium, but enjoy your game nonetheless. And then if Albany does shock the world, enjoy what you see coming home, because 15th winningest program all time. I mean, I'd imagine that win would be celebrated forever, no matter what the West Virginia does the rest of this year. That would obviously mean a lot to you, Albany. And I thought you were gonna say you came down for a basketball game when you said Syracuse right away, but you got to experience Pat White and Steve Slayton, so that also works. So Adam, I appreciate the time, man. Have a good day.
Thank you very much for having me.
So the Mountaineers now have the pressure. It's a quality FCS program. It's different than the 11-win team that Albany put forth last year that Brown's been talking about, that a lot of us have been talking about. So it's nice to have somebody who covers that program to kind of pop that balloon a little bit. This isn't the same team. Would have been interesting if West Virginia played that team, but this is not the same team. Albany not normally that level at FCS, even though there's been some quality years mixed in. Yeah, they're going to need a turnover. They're going to need some special teams. They're going to need to run back a kick or two. They're going to need a lot. They're going to need a fumble recovery. They're going to need to take advantage. I would imagine West Virginia wins this game comfortably. But what they can't do, and what Ethan and I talked about on the last episode of this very show here, Mountaineer Report, they cannot do what they did against Duquesne. They cannot flirt with disaster early on. They cannot allow the FCS sideline to go wild. They cannot allow SportsCenter to have a highlight play from the FCS. They got to dominate. They got to put it on Albany. Again, you don't got to disrespect, but maybe you do. And it's because the fan base is now leaving again. They're no longer trusting the climb after the effort put forth against Penn State. As we said before, it's not just about the loss. Nobody in their real right mind was predicting a win over Penn State. I surely was not. But the effort looked worse than a year ago at Penn State. The team played worse. Garrett Green did not look any better off of what has been discussed throughout the offseason. Arguably, he looked worse, looked out of sorts. They looked overwhelmed. They looked like it was too big for them. And they said they didn't buy into the Pat McAfee hype and they weren't going out and they were at home studying. Well, again, the effort wasn't there, and that's on offense. That's eventually on defense, as the defense eventually broke down and it almost appeared to kind of quit at the end. Special teams was okay, but that it's not enough, and that didn't matter. They didn't convert when Brown got aggressive. Nothing went the Mountaineers' way. Even when they get a turnover early, which is what Albany's going to try to do in this game, they then flip it right back. Penn State doesn't score, but they just miss opportunities at big plays. They don't do anything in the red zone when that's supposed to be strength of this team and what they improved upon in the offseason with multiple red zone threats now, not just Cole Taylor. None of that mattered. I wrote a lot about this on WV Sports Now, so go there to find more of my takes from the Penn State game and my preview now for this matchup against Albany, because the receivers need to be better, the D-line needs to be better, a lot needs to be better, the Mountaineers need to be better and need to play really, really well going into obviously a big out-of-conference game in the backyard brawl in Pittsburgh to kind of get the rubber game of that recent series, and then in Big 12 play with ranked teams, it will not be easier. So 15, 14, 20-point win, that's not going to allow anybody to slurp any Kool-Aid again. West Virginia got to put it on Albany, but it's a quality Albany program. We will see what this year's Albany team, the Albany Great Danes, do in Morgantown under the lights against the West Virginia Mountaineers. It's an historic program, no matter what you think of it. Boy, what a win that would be for Albany, but boy, what an historic loss that'd be for the Mountaineers. They can't let it happen, and they have a lot they need to accomplish in that game aside from just winning.